morning, everyone. Today we'll be looking at the Battle of the Somme, which was the largest battle in the Western Theater or the Western Front for World War I. Overall, this was a big example of trench warfare where both the Allied and Central Powers were dug into the ground in trenches as we see here. Now, when they first started the war, they thought it was going to be a very quick and glorious war, and especially the British and the French thought with this offensive tactic that they would be able to break through the German lines. However, they saw once this started that this would not be the case, and the Battle of the Somme turned into a months-long battle that was very, very gruesome and had the largest casualties of the war. Because of the trench warfare, they quickly turned into a stalemate where both sides would be fighting each other, but neither side was able to gain much ground. Because of this tactic, many people died overall. Now, what we can see here is that our trenches were not going to be very clean places, and especially the Allied ones were susceptible or prone to flooding, infestation of rats, and then also there would be a large amount of disease that came through the trenches as well because of the unhygienic conditions. If we were to look at the Central Powers, the German trenches were actually much better in terms of their conditions. They had concrete bunkers that they would use instead of just dirt and earth as part of it. And so that kept some of the water out and also kept the people drier, which also led to less disease and also fewer rats. There were lots of rats in the trenches as well on both sides. Now, what we see here is that these soldiers are carrying barbed wire. This barbed wire was used for the agricultural revolution, where they would have the enclosure movement and they would start to pen off their land and say whose is whose. But they used this agricultural fencing and used it for the war. And so, why would they use it in the war? They would use it as a defensive tactic, and so you couldn't just run into somebody else's trench. They would have a big tangle of sharp, pointy, jagged barbs or that would get caught on your clothing, get caught on your skin, and make it very difficult to actually get through to the trenches. Now, during the Battle of the Somme, what they tried to use was a lot of artillery. And so artillery are going to be these large cannons right here in order to try to weaken the other side. And so we can still see the effects of these artillery shellings and the trenches. And so here we'll see the trench, and then all these holes here are going to be pockmarks or divots left over from the artillery. And so as people or soldiers went over the top, and over the top means to go from the trenches and run towards the enemy lines, you have this no man's land. And so this was open to being fired upon by sharpshooters, people like with snipers, what we would call them today, also to machine gun fire, and really there's no cover for you to actually hide from any of these war machines that would be firing at you. And so what they're trying to do was use the artillery to try to weaken the defenses that were in the trenches. Not to much effect. And so a lot of times they would shoot lots and lots and lots of artillery rounds, but the other side would have lots of people that still survived it, and the machine guns would still be able to fire as the other side came through. As I mentioned, they did have new technology, and so we see that they had these machine guns that, as we've seen in other slides, could fire up to 600 rounds per minute or 600 shots per minute, and we only need one or two people to actually fire and then to load it. And so it was much better designed than from other machine guns. As we see here, these guys are wearing gas masks. So that means that we will also have poisonous gas, such as mustard gas and chlorine gas. Now, these gases were heavier than air, so once they were fired, like from an artillery, they would start to seep out and actually sink into the trenches. And so we would have some pretty disastrous effects that we'll be seeing in our Ed puzzle. Also, we have a new invention that's brought into the war for the first time, and that is the tank. The tank was actually designed to try to cross trenches, and so we have armor plating that would help defend the soldiers on the inside from being hit by machine gun fire or other rifle fire. Now, what was problematic with the tanks is that they would break down just due to machinery because it was a brand new invention, and also because of the very thick mud. And so there's lots of mud that we'll be seeing in our Ed puzzle. And so we can understand why these tanks maybe didn't make it all the way to the other side all the time. Now, kind of a fun fact for us is the tank was actually disguised as a water carrying mechanism. And so when there were spies that saw these big contraptions, they thought they were just used to hold water and transport water. So we think about like a water tank. Part of the reasons why it's called a tank. And so they thought it was actually for water. All right, and you should have been assigned the Ed puzzle called the Battle of the Somme. There are a few questions that are in it, but it does give us a much better look at what the conditions were like, both in the trenches as well as the number of artillery shells that were fired as well. And then after we watch our Ed puzzle, we'll see the outcome. And so the overall outcome, as also mentioned in the video, was that for all these months of fighting from July until November, there was only gained about 6 miles or a little bit more than 10 kilometers. And so we didn't have a large gain of ground for these long months of fighting and hardships. And so a lot of people said that it didn't actually amount to much, whereas other historians say that the Battle of the Somme was beneficial for the Allies that helped lead to the victory. But as we see in the Ed puzzle, we can ask our central question, who won the first day of the Battle of the Somme? And so the first day, we'll see a lot more in our Ed puzzle, so make sure we answer this question in our class comments as well. So I hope you're all doing well. Hope you enjoyed your weekend, and take care, everyone.